She never expected it. A life spent in the shadows of her dreams, where the slums were her world, but destiny had other plans. Eva's heart raced as she carefully placed the last of the coffee cups on the worn counter of the cafe. She looked out the window, watching the rain pour down on the city. Her life had always been a series of small, mundane moments. The same streets, the same faces, the same routine. She worked hard, but her dreams always felt just out of reach, like stars on the edge of the horizon that could never be touched. But tonight, something in the air felt different. She couldn't put her finger on it, but it was as if the universe had whispered a secret to her. Mark, the billionaire she had never dreamed of meeting, had entered her life in a way she never expected. His presence was striking, his power palpable. As the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire, Mark was the kind of man who had everything: money, status, control, everything but love. And now, in the midst of her quiet life, Eva would cross paths with him in a way that would change everything. The moment he walked into the cafe, his eyes met hers, and for a brief second, the world stood still. Mark looked at Eva with a kind of curiosity, a look that seemed out of place for someone used to being surrounded by luxury and power. He wasn't just another rich man. It was something about him, something more vulnerable, that intrigued her. But Eva, always careful, remained calm, hiding the racing thoughts in her mind. She hadn't had the luxury of dreams before. She wasn't about to start now. Yet, something in Mark's gaze made her feel as if maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the life she had known. The cafe was bustling with activity, but in that brief moment, it felt like the world was watching them. He took a seat at the counter, close enough that she could hear the quiet hum of his voice as he ordered his coffee. Eva couldn't help but steal glances at him, trying to piece together the enigma before her. His polished suit and perfectly combed hair made him seem like a man who had everything under control, yet the way his eyes lingered on her seemed almost desperate, as if he were searching for something he hadn't found in years. He was a billionaire, yet there was a loneliness in his demeanor that matched her own. And that was the moment she realized. Life as she knew it was about to change. She didn't know how or why, but in this moment, her world collided with his. And somewhere deep inside, she felt the pull of something bigger than both of them. A story waiting to unfold, a love waiting to be found, a destiny waiting to be written. The following days were a blur for Eva. The city that once felt so small to her now seemed vast, full of untold opportunities. Every morning, she awoke with a renewed sense of purpose, as though the universe had granted her a second chance. Her hands were always busy, either serving coffee at the cafe or studying at the local library after hours. She had no time to waste. The weight of her dreams, the dreams she had pushed aside for so long, now felt like a call she couldn't ignore. The chance encounter with Mark had ignited something in her that she hadn't realized was there, a desire for something more, something greater. She had always been content with what little she had, but now she was determined to reshape her destiny. As days turned into weeks, Eva's life slowly started to change. She found herself walking taller, holding her head higher. She began to see the world differently, not as a series of obstacles, but as a field of possibilities. At the cafe, her colleagues noticed the shift in her. "You're different lately," one of them remarked, handing her a coffee cup. Eva only smiled. She didn't know how to explain it. It wasn't just the new clothes she had bought with the small savings she had tucked away, nor was it the way she carried herself now. It was the way she felt. A quiet strength had taken root inside her. And somehow, it was no longer enough to stay in the background, hidden behind her humble life. The encounter with Mark had done something more than ignite a spark. It had given her the belief that she could change her life, that she deserved more. One afternoon, as Eva was closing the cafe, the familiar sound of the bell above the door rang out. She looked up, surprised, to see Mark standing there. He looked different this time, softer, less guarded. He stepped forward, his usual confidence replaced by a kind of vulnerability. "Eva," he said, his voice uncertain, "I've been thinking about you." His words hit her harder than she expected. The last time they spoke, he was just another rich man passing through her life. But now, there was something different in his eyes, something that made her pause. She wiped her hands on the apron and gave him a polite but guarded smile. "What brings you here today?" I wanted to apologize," Mark said, his gaze dropping to the floor. I never intended to make you feel less than. Eva's heart skipped a beat. She had expected many things, but never this. Never him apologizing for his actions. She could see that he was genuine, but something inside her told her that this was not the moment to let her guard down. I'm not sure what you mean, she replied carefully, her voice steady but distant. You didn't do anything wrong. Mark stepped closer, his eyes searching hers as if he were looking for something that could explain the distance between them. I wasn't honest with you when we met, he confessed. I didn't realize how much I needed someone who could see me for who I really am, not just the billionaire CEO. Eva's mind raced. The man standing before her was not the same man who had walked into her cafe weeks ago. This was someone different, someone who, perhaps, was just as lost as she was. But Eva wasn't ready to fall into his world just yet. I appreciate your honesty, she said, her voice low and calm. But I don't think we should keep crossing paths. Mark's face fell, but he nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I just want you to know that you've made an impact on me, he said quietly, turning to leave. And if you ever change your mind, I'll be here. Eva watched him go, the sound of the door closing behind him louder than it had ever been. Her heart was conflicted. Part of her wanted to run after him, to see where this unexpected connection could lead. But another part of her knew that this was her moment. A moment to take control of her life, to continue on the path she had started alone. As Mark's figure disappeared into the distance, Eva stood in the doorway for a moment longer, letting the cool evening breeze brush past her. The future was unknown, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face it on her own terms. She would rise. She would rebuild. And nothing, no one, could stop her now. Eva stood in the doorway for what felt like an eternity after Mark left. The cool evening breeze swept through the city, but she barely noticed it. Her thoughts were tangled, unsure of what to make of everything that had just happened. She had not expected his apology, and she definitely had not expected it to stir something in her. She had always thought that if she kept her head down, stayed focused on her work, and didn't expect too much from life, she would be safe from heartbreak. But now, something was different. She could feel it in her bones. She wasn't the same person she had been just a few months ago. She had changed, but she wasn't sure yet how or why. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs. The weight of the world had always felt heavy on her shoulders, but now, for the first time, she felt the possibility of something else. Something more. The next few days were filled with quiet reflection. Eva didn't hear from Mark again, and part of her was relieved. She had to focus on herself, on the life she was building. She couldn't let distractions, no matter how tempting, derail her journey. Still, there was a part of her that couldn't help but wonder what would happen if their paths crossed again. She couldn't deny the chemistry, the unspoken connection. But that was a question for another time. She had a new purpose now. The days passed in a blur of hard work. Eva's life at the cafe had become a routine, but she was no longer just a part of it. She felt as though she were carving out her own space in the world. Her colleagues noticed the change, the way she carried herself, and even her manager began to offer her more responsibility. It was a subtle shift, but Eva noticed it. She had always been the quiet one, the one who kept to herself. But now, she was stepping into a version of herself that had always been locked away, hidden under layers of fear and self-doubt. She was beginning to believe that she was worthy of more. One evening, after the cafe had closed and the last customers had left, Eva decided to take a walk. The city was quiet, and the streets seemed to hum with the energy of life. She walked aimlessly, letting her feet guide her, her mind clear of everything except the rhythm of her steps. The sound of heels clicking on the pavement was the only noise in the stillness, and as she walked, she found herself heading toward the business district. She had passed through this part of the city many times before, but tonight it felt different. She wasn't just passing through, she was becoming part of it. As she walked past the towering buildings and the shining windows, she couldn't help but think of Mark. She had never allowed herself to imagine a life like this, filled with power and prestige. But somehow, she was beginning to see that it was possible. Not for him, but for her. She had spent so many years convinced that her place was always going to be in the shadows, that her dreams were too far out of reach. But now, she felt the pull of something greater. As if the city itself were offering her a glimpse of the life she could have. It wasn't about the money, the status, or the glamour. It was about the freedom to be who she truly was, without fear. That night, Eva made a promise to herself. She would never again allow herself to feel small. She would never again let her circumstances dictate her worth. And as she stood there, staring up at the glowing skyline, she felt a sense of power stir within her. It was as if the city, with all its shining lights and endless possibilities, was telling her that she was ready for whatever came next. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to follow it, no matter where it took her. The next morning, as Eva walked into the cafe, she felt different. The air seemed fresher, the sunlight warmer. She moved with a new purpose, and when she entered the kitchen, her manager looked up in surprise. "You're early," he remarked. "I've got a few things to take care of today," she said with a smile. She was more than just a girl who worked at a cafe now. She was someone with a future, with plans. And for the first time in her life, she was going to take control of it. As the day went on, Eva worked harder than ever before. She poured coffee, cleaned tables, and took orders, but there was a fire in her now, a fire that had never been there before. She didn't just do her job, she owned it. The shift was subtle, but it was there. People began to notice her in a way they hadn't before. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a force, and she was ready to prove it to herself and to the world. By the end of the day, she felt exhausted but exhilarated. She had put everything she had into that shift, and for the first time, it felt like enough. She was enough. Eva had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer the girl she had been. She had stepped into a new version of herself, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Eva woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose. The room around her, small and cluttered with books and papers from her late-night study sessions, felt like her sanctuary. She had come so far from where she started, and as the morning light filtered through the curtains, she felt ready for the next chapter. She wasn't the same girl who once believed she would always be stuck in the shadows, waiting for life to change. She had taken control, and now it was time to make that control count. It wasn't going to be easy, but she wasn't afraid anymore. The cafe was busy, but Eva didn't mind. She moved with purpose, her focus sharper than it had ever been before. The clinking of cups, the sound of customers chatting, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but it all seemed to fade into the background as she went through her tasks. It was almost as if the world was moving in slow motion, and she was in complete control of her actions. As the day wore on, Eva caught sight of her manager, who was busy in the kitchen, but his eyes kept darting toward her. He was watching her with a look of surprise, perhaps even admiration. Eva had always been just another face in the cafe, another worker who showed up and did her job. But today, something had changed. She wasn't just another worker anymore. She was someone who had earned the right to be seen. At the end of the day, as the last customer left and the lights dimmed, Eva stood behind the counter, her hands resting on the polished wood. It had been a long day, but it had felt different. She had worked harder than she ever had, but this time, it didn't feel like a chore. It felt like a triumph. She wasn't just serving coffee. She was building something of her own. As she locked up for the night, Eva's thoughts drifted back to Mark. She hadn't seen him since their last meeting at the cafe, and part of her wondered if their paths would cross again. She had been focused on her own journey, but she couldn't deny the fact that there was something about him. Something that had stirred a part of her she didn't even know existed. But Eva was no longer waiting for anyone to change her life. She was changing it herself. She wasn't looking for validation or permission. She was stepping into a future she was determined to create on her own terms. The next morning, Eva received a message. It was from Mark. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the text. "Eva, I hope you're doing well. I know we haven't spoken much, but I wanted to reach out. I've been thinking about you and the way you've changed my perspective on life. If you're free, I would love to see you again." Eva stared at the screen for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She hadn't expected to hear from him again, and certainly not like this. But her heart told her that this wasn't just another chance encounter. This was something more. She felt the stirrings of curiosity, but she also knew she had to stay focused. Her life was hers to shape now, and she couldn't afford to lose sight of the path she had started down. After a long pause, Eva decided to respond. "Mark, it's good to hear from you. I've been keeping busy, as usual. I appreciate your message, and maybe we can meet sometime soon." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. She wasn't sure what would come of it, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. If anything, she was ready to face whatever came next with the same determination she had shown in the past few months. Life had a way of surprising her, but now, she was the one in control. That evening, Eva met Mark at a small cafe in the business district. It wasn't the same cafe where they had first met, but there was something about the setting that felt familiar. Mark was already there when she arrived, sitting by the window with a calm expression on his face. When he saw her, his eyes lit up with genuine warmth. "Eva," he said, standing up as she approached. "It's good to see you." She smiled, nodding slightly as she took a seat. The conversation started out easy enough, small talk at first, but soon, they were talking about the things that really mattered, their hopes, their dreams, and the things that had shaped them into who they were. Mark listened with intent, his gaze never wavering from hers. He seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say, and for the first time, Eva felt like someone truly saw her for who she was. As they talked, she couldn't help but notice how different Mark seemed. The walls he had built around himself seemed to have come down, just a little. He wasn't just the successful businessman now. He was someone who had been touched by her strength. And in that moment, Eva realized that while their lives had been different, they weren't as far apart as they had once seemed. This wasn't about her changing him or him changing her. It was about two people, each on their own journey, coming together at the right time. By the end of the evening, they both knew something had shifted. Eva wasn't sure what the future held for her and Mark, but she did know one thing. She was no longer the girl who had lived in the shadows. She had stepped into the light, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. Eva had always believed that life moved in a straight line. Work hard, do what you're told, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get somewhere. But as the days passed after meeting Mark again, she started to feel that life had more twists and turns than she had ever imagined. It was not just the job at the cafe or the late nights studying that kept her awake now. It was the thought of what could be. The thoughts of Mark were never far from her mind, but she couldn't ignore the one thing that had kept her going all this time, the desire to carve out a life of her own, independent and unshaken. She had no illusions anymore. She had tasted what it was like to feel seen, truly seen, for the first time. Mark had recognized something in her, something she had spent years hiding from the world. It wasn't just her looks or the way she carried herself. It was her inner strength. But now, she was learning that she had to stand on her own 2 feet first, regardless of how strong the pull between them was. Her days were filled with work at the cafe, but something had changed in the way she approached it. She wasn't just passing through anymore. She owned the moment, whether it was refilling coffee cups or wiping down tables. There was a rhythm to her life now, a rhythm she had created. She worked long hours, but she was no longer just surviving. She was building, growing. Her evenings were spent poring over books in the library, but not just the books she had once read to pass the time. Now, they were part of a larger plan. She was making herself ready for whatever opportunities would come her way. Every day, she was taking small steps forward, the kind of steps that would eventually take her where she wanted to go. But despite everything, there were moments when she thought of Mark. His presence lingered in the back of her mind, like a faint melody that played over and over again. When he had reached out to her, she had been caught off guard. She wasn't sure what she expected from their meeting, but it wasn't that feeling of being seen, truly seen, for the first time. He had apologized for the way he had treated her before, and it had made her heart ache in a way she didn't expect. She had never thought of herself as someone worthy of apology. After all, hadn't she always just done what she had to do to get by? But Mark's apology had stirred something in her. She couldn't explain it, but it was as if a door she had long closed had suddenly been opened. She had felt that pull again, the one that said maybe there was more to her life than what she had known. And then, there was the message. Mark's words had lingered in her thoughts for days. She had tried to focus on her own life, but they kept coming back to her. "If you're free, I would love to see you again." It was simple, yet those words had the power to change everything. Eva had replied cautiously, knowing that she couldn't just let herself fall into the same patterns as before. She had to remain strong, remain focused. Still, part of her wanted to see him, to understand what had changed in him, what had changed in them. And so, they met again. This time, it wasn't just a chance encounter. It was a choice. They met in a quiet park near the business district, a place that felt far from the chaos of their everyday lives. Mark was waiting on a bench when she arrived. His gaze lifted as she walked toward him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other, as if unsure of what to say next. Eva sat down beside him, feeling the weight of the silence between them. Mark was the first to speak, his voice soft but steady. "I know we've both been through a lot," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I want you to know that I see you. I see the strength you have, and I admire it." His words hit her harder than she expected. For a moment, she couldn't speak. She had spent so long hiding her true self, so long pushing down the parts of her that felt vulnerable, that hearing Mark say those words left her breathless. She had always been afraid of being seen, afraid of showing weakness. But here, with him, it felt different. "I'm not sure what you want from me, Mark," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've come so far on my own. I can't just go back to who I was." He nodded slowly, his expression serious. "I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking you to go back. I just want to be part of your life, if you'll let me." Eva's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure what to make of his words, but she knew that she couldn't go back. She had to keep moving forward. She had to keep building. "I can't promise anything," she said, her voice steady. "But I'll give you a chance." For the first time in a long while, Eva felt like she was standing on the edge of something new. She wasn't sure what it would look like or where it would lead, but she knew it was the right choice. She wasn't just walking down a path laid out for her by others. She was making her own path now, one step at a time. Eva sat quietly in her apartment, staring at her phone screen. Mark's message had been simple but clear. "Of course. When can I see you?" She had been thinking about this moment for days, knowing that it was inevitable. She had asked herself over and over whether she was ready, whether she could open herself up to someone again. She wasn't afraid of love, not anymore. She had learned that love, like everything else in life, was something that could be controlled, something she could choose for herself. She knew that now, but still, she hesitated. She had spent so much time building her own life, her own identity, and the thought of allowing someone else into it felt foreign. But it wasn't just anyone. This was Mark, the man who had seen her when no one else had. The man who had made her feel like she was worthy of something more. And somehow, in the quiet of that moment, Eva realized that she wasn't just afraid of love. She was afraid of needing someone. Afraid of losing herself. She took a deep breath and set her phone down on the table. It wasn't about losing herself. It was about finding something new. And maybe, just maybe, she could find that with Mark. After a few minutes, she grabbed her phone again, her fingers typing out a quick response. "How about tomorrow evening? I'll meet you at the same park." She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. The truth was, she wanted to see him. She wanted to understand why he had reached out to her, why she couldn't shake the feeling that they were meant to meet. As the minutes passed, Eva's nerves slowly began to settle. She knew what she had to do now. She was ready. The next day, Eva found herself standing outside the same park where she and Mark had met before. The air was cool, and the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden hue over everything. As she walked along the path, she felt a strange calm wash over her. The sounds of the city faded away as she approached the bench where Mark had been waiting for her. She could feel her heartbeat picking up the pace, but it wasn't the same nervous flutter she had felt before. This time, it was different. This time it felt right. When she reached the bench, Mark was already there, his hands resting on his knees, looking out at the horizon. He turned when he heard her approach, and their eyes met for a moment. Neither of them spoke right away. They just stood there, quietly, as if letting the moment stretch between them. Eva smiled slightly, taking a deep breath before sitting down next to him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly, his voice steady. Eva turned to face him, her smile softening. "I wasn't sure what to expect," she said, her voice low but clear. "But I knew I needed to see you." Mark's gaze softened, and he leaned forward slightly. "I didn't expect things to go the way they did between us," he admitted. "I think I pushed you away when I should have done the opposite." Eva nodded slowly. "I didn't make it easy," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "But I was scared. I didn't know how to let someone in. I didn't know how to trust again." Mark reached out, his hand brushing against hers. Eva's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't pull away. Instead, She let the contact linger, feeling the warmth of his hand against hers. I get that, Mark said softly. I've been where you are. I've been afraid of losing control, afraid of needing someone else. But I'm learning that it's okay to let go sometimes. Eva looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the same vulnerability she had felt herself. They were both scared, both unsure of what they were doing. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were here, together. I think I'm ready, Eva said, her voice steady now. Ready to see where this goes. Mark's smile was small but genuine, and his eyes seemed to soften. Me too, he said, his voice low. They sat there in silence for a moment, letting the quiet of the park wrap around them. It wasn't a grand declaration of love or some dramatic moment. It was just two people, sitting together, finally ready to take the next step. Eva knew that their journey together wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, mistakes, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. She wasn't looking for someone to complete her, and she wasn't waiting for someone to fix her. She was building a life that was her own. And if Mark was a part of that life, then it was something she was ready to explore. They didn't need to talk about the future right then. They didn't need to make promises. All that mattered was that, in that moment, they were together. And that was enough. Eva had never felt more alive than she did in that moment. Sitting next to Mark in the park, with the warm sunlight fading into the horizon, everything felt different. It wasn't just the peace of the park or the calm that surrounded them. It was the realization that she had taken control of her own life, and that Mark, for all his power and wealth, wasn't here to save her. He wasn't offering her a life of luxury or making promises he couldn't keep. He was simply offering companionship, a shared moment, and that, somehow, felt like everything. As they sat together, the quiet between them no longer felt heavy. It was comfortable. It was real. They didn't need to rush into anything. The future would unfold on its own, but for the first time, Eva was ready to see what it would bring. Days turned into weeks, and each time she saw Mark, the bond between them grew stronger. There were no grand gestures or dramatic confessions of love. It was the small things that mattered. The way he looked at her when they spoke, the way their laughter came so easily. It was in the way she could be herself with him, without any pretenses. He was learning about her just as she was learning about him. They talked about their dreams, their pasts, their fears. Mark shared more than just his success stories. He talked about his childhood, the struggles he had faced to get to where he was now. Eva listened, truly listened, in a way she never had before. There was something about his vulnerability that drew her in. She wasn't the only one who had a past full of pain and regret. He had his own battles, his own scars. They were two people, carrying their own histories, but finding something new in each other. Eva's life was shifting, slowly but surely. She had never been one to rely on anyone else. But with Mark, she felt like she could. Not because she needed him, but because she wanted him in her life. There was a difference, and that difference meant everything to her. Her work at the cafe was more fulfilling than it had ever been. She had been given more responsibility, and it felt like her confidence was shining through in everything she did. She had grown into a woman who was no longer afraid to take charge of her life, and the people around her began to notice. Even her manager commented on the way she handled herself. It wasn't just the way she moved, but the way she spoke, the way she carried herself. Eva had always been quiet, but now, there was a strength to her voice that hadn't been there before. She knew that her life was far from perfect, but she was building something that was uniquely hers. And with Mark, she felt like they could build something together. It wasn't about the wealth or the status. It was about trust, about understanding, and about walking through life side by side. The days were filled with small, meaningful moments. They continued to meet at the park, to talk, to share, to grow together. There was no rush, no pressure. Eva wasn't in a hurry to change everything. But something had shifted inside of her. She was no longer waiting for life to happen. She was making it happen. One evening, after another long day at work, Eva received a call from Mark. He invited her to dinner at a restaurant she had never been to before, a place he described as special. When she arrived, she found that the restaurant was cozy, intimate, with soft lighting and a quiet ambience. It felt like it was meant for them, for the conversation they were about to have. As they sat down at the table, Mark looked at her with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "Eva," he began, his voice soft but steady. I know we haven't talked much about where this is going, but I want you to know that I care about you. I'm not asking for anything right now, but I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Eva's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it meant something. It meant that Mark wasn't rushing her, wasn't expecting her to have all the answers. He was giving her the space she needed to figure it out, to take her time. And that was all she had ever wanted. I care about you too, Mark, she said, her voice steady. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm not afraid to find out. The words hung in the air for a moment, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. They didn't need to say anything more. They had said enough. As the evening continued, they talked more, laughed more, and for the first time in a long time, Eva felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because she had everything figured out, but because she was on the right path. The path she had chosen for herself. And Mark, with all his wealth and success, was walking beside her, not as someone who could save her, but as someone who wanted to be part of her journey. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in her life, Eva knew that was enough. Eva sat at her small kitchen table, the soft hum of the city outside her window barely registering in her mind. She had always been someone who kept her thoughts to herself, but lately, her mind had been a whirlwind of emotions. The days with Mark had been simple, yet profound. They had spent countless hours together, talking, laughing, exploring the things that made them who they were. Mark wasn't the same man he had been when they first met. He was open, honest, and more vulnerable than she had ever expected. Eva had come to realize that their connection was not based on some fleeting attraction or temporary desire. It was something deeper, something that could withstand the test of time. Yet, despite everything, a small part of her remained cautious. She couldn't help it. It was the way she had been raised, the lessons she had learned growing up. Trust didn't come easily, and love was something that couldn't be given away without careful consideration. Mark seemed to understand that, which only made her heart ache more. He never pressured her. He never asked her to be anyone she wasn't. He simply wanted to be with her, and that was enough. But even with that comfort, Eva knew that she wasn't ready to make any promises, not yet. She had spent so much of her life focused on surviving, on making it through each day, that she wasn't sure what it meant to truly be vulnerable with someone. She didn't know if she was capable of giving someone else that kind of power over her heart. Still, every time Mark smiled at her, every time he reached out to touch her hand or looked at her with those soft, understanding eyes, she felt herself slipping further into his world. The fear that had once held her back was beginning to lose its grip. But it wasn't gone yet. One afternoon, as she walked through the park near her apartment, her phone buzzed with a message from Mark. I was thinking about you, it read. Maybe we could do something special this weekend? I want to show you something. Eva smiled to herself. It was such a simple message, yet it held so much meaning. She didn't know what Mark had planned, but the thought of it made her heart flutter. She had always been the type to keep her expectations low, but with him, it felt like the possibilities were endless. She thought for a moment before replying. I'd like that. I'm free Saturday afternoon. Saturday came quickly, and Eva found herself standing in front of a beautiful building she had never seen before. Mark had sent her the address earlier that day, and as she stood there, she realized that this was a side of him she had yet to explore. This was a part of his world she had never imagined. The building was elegant, with large glass windows that let in the sunlight, and the moment Eva stepped inside, she was struck by the beauty of it. It was a modern art gallery, filled with breathtaking paintings and sculptures, each one more impressive than the last. Mark was waiting for her near one of the exhibits, a gentle smile on his face. I thought you might enjoy this, he said, his voice soft. Eva looked around, taking in the artwork. It wasn't just the pieces themselves, but the way they made her feel, alive, inspired, free. She had always loved art, but she had never experienced it in this way before. It wasn't just about the paintings on the walls. It was about the emotions they evoked, the way they made her think about the world differently. As they walked through the gallery, Mark shared stories about the artists, about how each piece had come to life. His passion for the subject was contagious, and Eva found herself more and more captivated by everything he said. She had always thought of herself as someone who didn't need much, just enough to survive. But as she stood there with Mark, surrounded by beauty and creativity, she realized how much she had been missing. Life wasn't just about getting by. It was about living fully, about experiencing the world in all its depth. The afternoon flew by, and by the time they left the gallery, Eva felt like a part of her had shifted. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that gallery hours ago. She was someone different, someone who was beginning to see the world through new eyes. Mark walked her to her car, and as they stood there, he reached out to gently touch her hand. "I'm glad you came today," he said, his voice full of warmth. "I think we're both ready for what comes next." Eva's heart skipped a beat. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was ready to face it with him, to see where their connection would take them. And for the first time in a long time, Eva knew that she wasn't alone. She had someone by her side, someone who saw her for who she truly was. That thought brought a sense of peace to her that she hadn't known she was missing. As she drove away, Eva felt a sense of excitement rising within her. She was no longer just waiting for life to happen. She was making it happen. And whatever came next, she knew she would face it with courage and an open heart. Eva woke up the next morning feeling different. The soft morning light filtered through her curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. It wasn't just the light that felt different, though. It was everything. Her life had shifted in ways she hadn't even noticed until now. She had spent so many years thinking that the best way to protect herself was to keep her heart guarded. But with Mark, things felt different. She wasn't sure where this journey was leading, but she was beginning to trust it. She was trusting him. And most importantly, she was starting to trust herself. Mark had been a constant presence in her life, but not in an overwhelming way. He didn't rush her. He didn't push for more than she was ready to give. It was the kind of relationship Eva had always dreamed of, one based on respect, trust, and understanding. As the days went on, they spent more time together, and with each moment, their bond grew deeper. They continued to explore the things that mattered to them: art, music, quiet walks through the city, and each conversation felt like an opening of doors to new possibilities. Mark had his own share of scars, and Eva could see the way he was learning to open up. They both had pasts that had shaped them into who they were now, and they both knew that healing wasn't a destination but a journey. Eva knew she was on the right path. It wasn't about waiting for life to give her what she wanted. It was about creating the life she wanted. And now, Mark was a part of that creation. She had never imagined she would feel this way. So free, so at peace with herself. But here she was, standing on the edge of a future that was hers to shape. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of his apartment, the air was filled with a sense of anticipation. They had been talking about everything and nothing, about the things that made them who they were, about the things they still hoped to accomplish. Mark looked at Eva, his expression soft but serious. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady. "We've spent so much time getting to know each other, and I feel like I'm finally seeing you for who you really are. And I just want you to know, I want to be a part of your future, no matter what that looks like." Eva's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected him to say something like that, but she couldn't deny the way it made her feel. It wasn't an ultimatum, it wasn't a pressure, it was simply an expression of his feelings, a sign that he cared. And that, in itself, was everything. "I want you to be a part of it too, Mark," Eva said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. "But we have to take things one step at a time. I'm still figuring out what this all means for me. For us." Mark smiled, his eyes lighting up. "I know. I'm not rushing you. I just want you to know that I'm here. Whenever you're ready." The words settled in Eva's heart, and she felt a wave of relief wash over her. She didn't have to have all the answers right now. She didn't have to know exactly where they were headed. She just had to know that she was on the right path, and that path, for now, included Mark. The next few weeks were filled with small, quiet moments. They spent afternoons in the park, weekends exploring new places in the city, and evenings curled up on the couch, simply enjoying each other's company. They didn't need grand gestures or extravagant displays of affection. What they had was simple, but it was real. And for Eva, that was enough. As the months passed, Eva found herself looking toward the future with a newfound sense of hope. She had never been the type to dream big or to expect much from life. But now, she felt like anything was possible. She was building the life she had always wanted, and Mark, in his own quiet way, was a part of that. He wasn't the answer to all her problems, but he was someone who made her believe in the possibility of a future filled with love, respect, and growth. One afternoon, as they sat together in the park, Eva turned to him with a smile. You know, she said softly, I never thought I'd be here, like this. I never thought I'd be this happy. Mark reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. You deserve this, Eva. You've worked hard to get here, and I'm proud of you. The words settled into her heart like a gentle promise. For the first time in her life, Eva didn't feel like she was fighting to survive. She was living, truly living, and for the first time, she felt like she had everything she needed. The future was no longer a mystery to be feared. It was a story that she was writing herself, one page at a time. And whatever came next, she was ready for it. Eva sat by the window of her apartment, the warm glow of the sunset spilling across the city. It had been months since she had first met Mark, and in those months, her life had changed in ways she never thought possible. The quiet moments they shared, the conversations that stretched deep into the night, the simple understanding that had blossomed between them, they all felt like pieces of something beautiful she had been searching for. For the first time in her life, Eva wasn't just existing. She was living. But with this new sense of peace came new questions, questions she had never dared to ask herself before. What was this? Where was this relationship going? And most importantly, could she trust herself to allow someone else into her world completely? She had spent so long building walls around her heart, afraid of losing herself, afraid of being hurt. But with Mark, those walls seemed to be falling away. He didn't ask her to change. He didn't ask her to be someone she wasn't. He simply accepted her. And, for the first time, Eva wondered if she could do the same. Accept love without fear, without hesitation. Mark had become a steady presence in her life, not someone who would come and go like the others. He was there, every day, proving through small acts of kindness that he truly cared for her. He never rushed her, never made her feel pressured. And yet, Eva knew that their connection was growing stronger, deeper, in ways neither of them had expected. It was no longer just about what they could offer each other. It was about something much more profound. It was about building a life together, one step at a time. One evening, after a quiet dinner together, they sat on the couch, the city lights twinkling outside the window. Mark turned to her, his eyes soft but filled with an earnestness that made her heart flutter. Eva, he began, his voice low, I know we've been taking this one day at a time, and I respect that. But I need you to know that I want more than just these moments with you. I want to be a part of your future. I want us to build something lasting. Eva's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the words before, from others, but there was something different in Mark's voice. It wasn't a promise wrapped in expectations. It was a simple, clear declaration. He wasn't asking for anything in return. He was simply sharing his feelings with her, allowing her the space to decide what that meant for her. She took a deep breath, feeling a rush of emotion. Mark, she said softly, her voice steady, I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I'd be able to trust anyone with my heart again. But with you, it's different. I don't have all the answers. I'm not sure what the future holds. But I know I want you in it. I'm ready for whatever comes next. Mark smiled, and in that smile, Eva saw everything she had been waiting for. Acceptance, understanding, and the promise of a future built together. There were no grand gestures, no promises of perfection, but there was something far more important, the willingness to be present, to take each step together, no matter what. As the days passed, Eva found herself stepping into a new chapter of her life, a chapter she never thought possible. She wasn't just learning how to trust Mark, she was learning to trust herself. She was no longer afraid of what the future might bring because, for the first time, she knew she wasn't alone. Mark was by her side, not as a savior, but as a partner, as someone who saw her for who she truly was. And with that, everything else seemed to fall into place. Their lives weren't perfect, but they were real. And that, Eva realized, was enough. She wasn't looking for someone to fix her. She didn't need to be fixed. She just needed someone who would walk beside her as she continued to grow, to change, and to build the life she had always dreamed of. And that was what Mark had offered her. Nothing more, nothing less. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready for whatever came next, and she knew that, whatever happened, she would face it with a heart full of love and a future full of possibilities. As the weeks passed, Eva continued to find herself in a rhythm she had never known before. It wasn't just about the work at the cafe or the quiet moments at home. It was about Mark and the unexpected joy he brought into her life. They had grown even closer, learning more about each other with every passing day. There were no grand revelations, no sudden life-altering decisions. It was the quiet moments that mattered, like when Mark brought her flowers after a long shift or when they sat together in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, yet still comforted by each other's presence. Eva had always been skeptical of love. It seemed so fragile, so easily broken. But with Mark, everything felt different. He wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But together, they were building something strong, something real. She had finally allowed herself to believe in the possibility of love, not as a fairy tale, but as something genuine, something worth nurturing. One evening, as they walked along the quiet streets of the city, Mark reached for her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it made Eva's heart skip a beat. "Eva," he said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "I know we've been taking things slow, and I respect that. But I want you to know that I'm ready for whatever comes next. I want to be with you, for as long as you'll have me." His words hit Eva like a soft wave, gentle but powerful. She stopped walking, turning to face him. In that moment, everything felt still, like the world around them had paused just for them. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that she wanted him in it. "I'm ready too," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been afraid for so long, afraid of losing myself. But with you, I feel like I'm not losing anything. I'm gaining something. I want this." Mark smiled, a smile that reached his eyes and made them sparkle. "I'm so glad," he whispered, pulling her into a hug. They stood there for a moment, the city lights shimmering in the distance, as if the world was confirming what they both already knew, that this was just the beginning. The next few weeks were filled with more of the same quiet, tender moments that had become the foundation of their relationship. They continued to explore their shared interests, from visiting art galleries to hiking in the nearby hills. But more than that, they were learning to trust each other in ways neither had ever done before. Mark had become someone Eva could rely on, not just as a lover, but as a partner in every sense of the word. And she had become the same for him. There were no grand declarations of love, no dramatic moments. It was simply the way they fit together, seamlessly, effortlessly. It wasn't about needing each other. It was about choosing each other, day after day. One evening, as they sat on the couch, enjoying a quiet night in, Mark turned to Eva, his expression serious yet gentle. "Eva," he said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about the future. I don't want to rush anything, but I want you to know that I'm serious about us. I see a future with you in it, and I want to take whatever steps are necessary to make that happen." Eva felt a warmth spread through her chest as she listened to him. She had never imagined that this kind of certainty could exist. They had built something strong, something real. She didn't need to rush into anything either. She knew that the future would unfold as it was meant to, but for the first time, she was excited about the possibilities. "I see it too," she replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I'm ready for whatever comes next." They didn't need to say anything more. The simple truth was that they had found something special in each other, something that didn't need to be defined by timelines or expectations. It was just love, real and true. And as they held each other that night, Eva knew that this was exactly where she was meant to be, exactly where they were both meant to be. The future was no longer a mystery. It was something they would create together, step by step, day by day. Eva woke up to the sound of rain tapping gently against the window, the soft, rhythmic sound soothing her as she slowly opened her eyes. It was early, but the morning light had already begun to creep through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the room. She stretched, her body still feeling the warmth of the previous night, the comfort of knowing that she wasn't alone. Life had changed in so many ways in the past few months, but somehow, it all felt like it had led to this moment. She had once feared the idea of letting someone in, of trusting someone with her heart, but now, with Mark, it felt effortless. Mark had become a part of her world in a way she never expected. He wasn't just a man she was in a relationship with. He was her partner, her confidant, her equal. Together, they had built something strong, something real, and for the first time in her life, Eva felt truly at peace with herself. There was no rush to define everything, no pressure to make promises they weren't ready to keep. They had learned to live in the present, cherishing each moment for what it was. Eva's phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Mark. I was thinking about you. I hope you're awake. I've got a surprise for you this weekend. Can't wait to see you. A smile tugged at her lips as she read his words. Even in the simplest of gestures, he never failed to make her feel special. Eva replied, I'm awake now. Can't wait to see what you've got planned. As the day went on, she couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. Mark had always been thoughtful in his gestures, but this felt different. She had no idea what the surprise was, but she was looking forward to whatever it might be. The weekend arrived, and Eva found herself standing in front of a quaint little restaurant in the heart of the city. Mark had told her to meet him there, but he had left no hints about what was to come. As she stepped inside, she was greeted by a warm atmosphere, soft lighting, quiet conversations, and the rich aroma of fresh food filling the air. She looked around and spotted Mark waiting at a table by the window. When he saw her, his face lit up, and he stood to greet her. You look beautiful, he said, his voice filled with admiration. Eva couldn't help but blush. Thank you, she replied, her heart skipping a beat. They sat down, and the evening unfolded in the most perfect way. They laughed, they talked, and they shared moments that felt like they were just for them. As the meal came to an end, Mark stood up and walked to her side of the table. I've got one more thing for you, he said with a smile. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Eva's eyes widened in surprise. Mark, what is this? Open it, he said softly. She took the box from his hands and carefully opened it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, simple but elegant, with a small charm in the shape of a heart. It was beautiful. Mark, this is too much, Eva whispered. Mark sat back down, his expression sincere. It's not too much, he said gently. It's a reminder of what we've built together. A reminder that we've got each other, no matter what comes next. Eva's heart swelled as she looked at the bracelet, then at him. She hadn't expected a gift like this, but it wasn't about the material object. It was about the thought and care that had gone into it. It was about the love they had for each other, the connection that had grown so naturally between them. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. This means more to me than you'll ever know. Mark smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. You mean the world to me, Eva. I just wanted to show you how much you mean to me, how much we mean to each other. Eva squeezed his hand, feeling a warmth spread through her. She didn't need grand gestures or promises of forever. What she had with Mark was real, and that was enough. As they left the restaurant, hand in hand, Eva felt a sense of peace wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that with Mark by her side, she could handle anything. Together, they would continue to build their future, step by step, one moment at a time. And that was all she needed.